And I said, honey, I'm flexible like a cat too. And oh, hi there, sorry about that, didn't see ya. Welcome back to another Coldblood and Cocktails. Like always, leave any crap you have in the litter box and come on in. This is a house of love, of furballs, and of course, positivity. Oh, my fellow felines, how are you today? I hope you're wonderful. I have just had a great day so far. God, look at how white this lipstick makes my teeth look. Thank you, Repop Cosmetics. Oh, what? Shameless promotion? Always, baby. So, what has everybody been up to? It's finally summer here in the US of gay, and already I'm wishing for fall. No, not really. I love summer. Let me know down in the comments below which kind of season you are, if you have seasons. I'm just itching to get back to Florida and have swamp ass all the time, you know? Oh, can you even see my little ears? I'm supposed to be, well, a panther, but this is cuter. I'm a cat. Meow. Oh, God. My little whiskers, I can feel them. All right, so before we get into today's case, let's grab our cocktail. I am still on a sober journey. Well, that's a lie. I drink wine. Actually, no, I won't have wine. I'm still getting my gallon a day in, baby. But when I do get back to drinking, I'm so fucking excited to try this drink. I love a Manhattan. And today we have a black Manhattan, which is just 2 ounces of rye whiskey or bourbon if you're a softie like me, an ounce of dark Amaro, a dash of Angostura bitters. How the fuck do you say that? A dash of orange bitters, and then one of those Luxardo cherries. Oh, these are so good, but so expensive. I would just like sit down and eat a jar of those bitches. Stir all the ingredients with some ice and then strain into a chilled glass. But without further ado, darlings, let's get to why we're really here. The dick. No, I'm just kidding. The story today's is really sad. I mean, they all are, but this guy was just fucking psycho. What am I saying? They all are. We're acting like that's something new. But we're gonna start our case way back in January of 1975, where a 17-year-old heiress named Leslie Whittle was snuggled up in her little bed when all of a sudden she was awoken by a shadow cutting across her room. Sphincter was clenched, mama. And if this wasn't scary enough to shoot your tampon across the room, the shadow suddenly stopped. Leslie's like, Grandma, are you ambient sleepwalking again? But nothing spoke back. Whatever this was lingering in the corner like a Taco Bell fart, and then suddenly the shadow lurched towards her. Standing at the end of her bed was a man dressed head to toe in black, wearing a ski mask and holding a sawed-off hillbilly shotgun. All this guy does is tell her to put her nightgown on and come with him. Of course she does, because what the fuck else was she gonna do? Oh God, this choker is tight. Normally I wouldn't mind, but not today. Anyways, this young girl was marched out into the freezing night barefoot, confused, terrified as tits, and wondering what was next. She had no idea that her final destination was a dark, damp sewage shaft in a remote park where the psychopath had rigged up like a personal dungeon. Meanwhile, back inside her house, the family woke up to an empty bed, an open window, and a shipping label stuck to the floor with packing tape. And written on the shipping label in big black marker were the words, "Pay 50,000 pounds or she dies." Ooh, girl, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I'd do it. No, I'm totally joking. Fuck. But the whole thing looks like the killer had a day job at the Office Depot and had a serious packing tape fetish. The shit was everywhere, stuck to lamps, banisters, the television, and the underwear drawer, on the Instant Pot, and even Goof Off wouldn't clean this shit up. The family calls the police, but they're immediately warned that if they got the po-pos involved, the girl would be dead. This creep had picked a spot months, maybe even years earlier, a place called Bath Pool Park near Kids Grove. This was deep in the woods too, where like if you weren't careful, you would find a tick on the dick, and there were like old drainage covers, and I guess underneath that there's like a vertical ventilation shaft that's like 50 feet deep, and that's where he left her, tethered by a steel wire around her neck, which he lovingly padded with elastoplast bandages, because apparently if you're gonna imprison a teenager in a hole, at least be gentle about it. Just how sweet. And because he was just such a kind soul, he even zhuzhed the place up a little bit for her. And this dude's convinced it'll work too, that he'll get the cash, she'll survive, and he'll walk away with enough money for a whole month of Starbucks. Spoiler alert, he doesn't, she doesn't, and the whole plan, it goes straight to hell. Ooh, what's jiggling? Is it my earrings or my necklace? We'll go more into that a little bit later though, because before he became a teenage girl abducting, sewage shaft, dungeon decorating, tape-wielding creep, Donald Neilson was just another boring dude with an inferiority complex the size of Jupiter. Neilson was born Donald Nappy in 1936 in a dreary little Yorkshire town. I mean, if you want to guarantee your kid a lifelong bitterness complex, name him after a British diaper. So, shocker, Donald eventually dumped Nappy for Neilson, trying to sound all rugged and manly and totally not like a children's teething toy. His childhood, of course, was not the best. Dad died early, leaving Donald to stew with a mother who basically taught him that if life shits on you, you double down and stomp back even harder. As he grew up, he just wanted to prove himself, so naturally he did the most predictable thing for a sad boy with something to prove. He joined the army. Neilson signed up for the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry in 1953, just convinced that this would transform him from local diaper joke to badass war hero. And in some ways, I guess it did. Like, the military gave him structure and skills, but also a solid and unhealthy taste for weapons. And unfortunately, instead of using those skills to, say, I don't know, save civilians or build homes for the poor, Neilson decided to use them for armed robbery and other crimes because, of course. Fast forward through a completely uneventful military career, he made it to corporal and then bounced around odd jobs, including working on buildings. And then by the early 1960s, he'd married Irene Tate and they had a daughter. But he put on the whole happy family facade and people assumed that good old Donny Boy was just a great guy. But we're here, of course, so underneath that daddy next door routine, he was stewing with resentment over being broke, unimpressive, and generally an underwhelming human. Neilson wanted cash, power, and respect. I mean, get in line, you little bitch. Who the fuck doesn't? So he put all his army skills to use, deciding to transform from average schlub to super criminal. And you'd think he'd be like a smart Ocean's 11 style thief with all that training, but honey, shut the fuck up and sit your ass down because this guy could trip over wind. So he started small, robbing sub-post offices all across England. He was like, yeah, this is my shit. Quiet, rural, sleepy little postmasters with a tiny safe and no alarm system? Chef's kiss for a wannabe subpar villain. So between 1967 and 1974, he pulled off dozens of these post office heists, creeping around like a Dollar Tree ninja. They called him Black Panther because he wore all black, moved quickly, and was, I guess, marginally cat-like in his delusions, meaning he shat in litter boxes, I'm assuming. But let's be real, he wasn't exactly a panther, more like a pissed-off possum with vertigo and a sawed-off shotgun. Neilson's idea of a burglary was to storm in barking orders, scaring the absolute shit out of the clerks, taking a few $100 and then bolting out before the village Bobby even had time to finish his cuppa. But he wanted bigger. Get in line for that, too. The fantasy of a bigger payday just burned a hole in his mind like an old car cigarette lighter until he convinced himself that all he needed was to score a big, massive ransom, which is where we bring in poor Leslie Whittle. Well, not literally poor. Far from it, in fact. Leslie was the only daughter of George Whittle, a very wealthy businessman who'd built a fortune in the coach company trade, basically rolling in enough cash to make her a prime target. And I think she had had a little bit of media coverage in the newspaper over an inheritance that she was getting, and Neilson stalked the shit out of this family for months, learning their routines, their security flaws, their house layout, you know, the usual creeper shit that we see on here. And then by January of 1975, he was finally ready. In between coughing up furballs and licking his own ass, Neilson had been playing out the entire night in his sick little brain, and tonight was finally the night. So we find ourselves back in that bedroom where Leslie had been peacefully dreaming before Sir Shit for Brains and a ski mask turned her life into a literal nightmare. After he snatched her from the bed, barefoot, nightgown flapping in the cold like a dog's jowls, he forced her into the car and drove into the night. Neilson, who kind of considered himself an Elon Musk of criminal innovation, had chosen a ventilation shaft 50 feet deep. And in there was a little tiny platform that you could stand on if you didn't mind rats, mold, and the faint smell of wet dish rags. But he'd basically turned this shaft into a twisted Airbnb from hell. He had that steel cable tied around Leslie's neck with padding on it, because deep down, I think he really thought this plan would work and he really didn't want to make her uncomfortable, allegedly. The police photos from the Bathpool Park showed a damp hellhole so vile you'd think Satan himself would say, "No, that's even a bit much for me." And the platform that she was stuck on was rickety as fuck. The ladder rungs were rusty and falling apart, and it was pitch black. Neilson, bless him, had left a flashlight, but the batteries were garbage like, "Sure, thanks, Don, real luxury resort, 2 out of 10 stars on VEVO for you." There's a crusty old sleeping bag in the corner as if that somehow made it cozy and homey. And how the fuck was she supposed to get into the sleeping bag when her neck was tied by a wire? And food, she had canned goods in a water flask, hardly fit for a prisoner, let alone a terrified 17-year-old. And the police found a leftover chocolate bar because I guess even monsters think that hostages need a little treaty treat. Every time you study that setup, you realize that Neilson was the king of half-assed villainy. He had the evil vision, but really lacked in execution. And his stupidity ended up costing Leslie her life. Oh my god, I just realized I'm missing the lamp that goes back behind me. I thought it looked a little bit empty. Well, next time. Well, if Leslie stepped off this little platform, she would die by hanging herself because of the cable. And that cable around her neck went all the way to the top of the shaft so that Donald could lift her if he needed. by the neck, like a fucked up bungee jumping Barbie. This was just the mind of a man who had watched way too many DIY crime shows and decided to go full Home Depot Hannibal Lecter. Leslie was left there terrified, alone, and straining against the steel wire. Neilson, meanwhile, swaggered his ass off to await ransom calls, certain his master plan would succeed. The family, of course, was in total meltdown mode. I mean, wouldn't you be? You wake up and your daughter's gone, like fuck me sideways with a box cutting blade. Of course you'd be scared. The police did end up getting involved because, duh, you don't not call the police in this kind of situation. But Neilson was watching, paranoid, convinced they'd screw it all up, which they kinda did. The plan to deliver the ransom fell apart faster than a Shein bikini in a hot tub. Confusion, delays, missed signals. My god, it sounds like my last relationship. And Leslie, she was still all alone in that shaft while the adults above were trying to coordinate a ransom that wouldn't result in her death. Neilson had rigged the wire so fucking poorly and incompetently that if Leslie so much as slipped off her little platform, the steel cable around her neck would pull tight. And that's exactly what happened. No dramatic showdown, no rescue in the nick of time, just a tragic, heartbreaking accident orchestrated by an incompetent monster who thought he was the world's biggest criminal genius but just suffered from baby dick syndrome. And once Leslie was dead, the Black Panther decided it was time for him to vanish just like a wet queef on the tennis court. This dude thought he was just the bee's knees, the absolute tits, the ultimate puppet master, pulling everyone's strings, and then when the show went to shit, he snuck off stage before anyone could boo him like a classic coward. Meanwhile, the entire country was about to have a collective aneurysm, and they were well in their right to have a little bitch fit. The police had totally bungled the ransom drop, the family was in shreds, and the tabloids were foaming at the mouth because a teenage heiress had been kidnapped and killed by a shadowy asshat that nobody could track. Cops were tearing their hair out like, who was this man? How could he have rigged a medieval-style dungeon inside a sewer pipe, killed a girl, and then ghosted out of existence like a bad grinder hookup? Well, let's remember the Black Panther had been practicing for years, which is really sad because if he was that shitty at something he'd practiced for years, imagine how terrible he was spontaneously. But good old Donnie boy, he actually was not new to this kind of terror. He'd been ramping up to this final hideous act through a series of burglaries and murders that should have told everyone he was basically a sociopathic powder keg with a short-ass fuse. Of course, he did have his burglaries, but he wasn't satisfied just waving his gun around like a drunk uncle helicoptering his willy at Thanksgiving. Wait, didn't everyone's uncle do that? You know what? Never mind. Point is, he killed before Leslie. Multiple people in these stick-up jobs he had been doing died because Neilson didn't just want the money, he wanted to dominate. This was his sick thrill, like, girl, just try a little choking in bed or something, shit. His first murder victim was Donald Skepper, a sub-postmaster. Neilson just shot him dead while robbing the post office, and the police were left scratching their scrotes with that one. Neilson was as slippery as spawn cum. No, fuck. Pond scum. There we go. Next was Derek Aston, another postmaster. Aston had tried to resist, and Neilson, proving that he was the ultimate chicken shit of a human, shot him too. Then came Sidney Grayland, a retired sub-postmaster who Neilson also murdered while searching for money. So by the time Leslie Whittle's case rolled around, the Black Panther wasn't just some random guy who had snapped overnight. He was a fully seasoned ass munch with a juicy kill count. And what really chills you is the planning. Neilson mapped out everything to a T, the escape routes, the timing, the locations. He was methodical, but also dumb enough to leave a trail of duct tape that would make any CSI nerd spontaneously climax. The police, though, bless their 1970s hearts, were just chasing shadows. Nobody had invented fancy DNA kits or GPS trackers yet. They were basically Scooby-Dooing it, running around with notepads and their pinkies up each other's butts, trying to match footprints to a psychopath who was 10 clumsy steps ahead of them. But let's swing back to Bathpool Park, where Leslie's body was finally discovered. A police officer found her on March 7th, 1975, still hanging there, her cold body tethered in that awful shaft. It was a scene so disgusting and gruesome that it even made grown men vomit. The newspapers went feral, of course, and the entire countryside demanded blood. Who was this sewer-dwelling, tape-obsessed maniac? The answer would come painfully over the next year as the police linked those post office murders together. Slowly, piece by grimy little piece, they saw that the same ghost in black had been pulling the trigger in every one of those robberies, using the same sawed-off shotgun, the same military swagger, the same I'm a big man because I can terrify defenseless people kind of energy. This guy was simply the school-ground bully of killers. When they realized this, though, Neilson was still out there plotting his next big move. The man was just unstoppable in his own head. But in reality, he was about as subtle as a clown car crashing into a wind chime store. And the final break came kinda by luck. In December of 1975, Neilson tried to force a couple, Gerald and Vivian Smith, out of their car at gunpoint. But plot twist, Gerald was not a wilting little flower. The dude fought the fuck back, and in the scuffle, Neilson Neilson lost control of the situation and the police were finally able to pounce and arrest his ass. Homeboy went from criminal mastermind to hunched old mess in handcuffs in about 2 seconds. Cuffs were his kryptonite and he was finally defeated. When they did a little searchy search on him, they found enough tape and tools and weapons to basically restock an entire aisle at Walmart. If you wanted evidence of the sick bastard shopping list, this was it. And by the time Neilson was dragged into custody, the public was practically sharpening their pitchforks. People wanted to roast him on a spit like a suckling pig, and honestly, who could blame them? But the real show was about to start, the trial. Donald, who thought he was a commando-level supervillain, was now chained up in a courtroom looking about as menacing as a stale crumpet. He now looked like what he was, a bitter, petty, permanently scowling man who'd been dragged from his evil lair by a couple of police officers and a dude with a backbone. And let me tell you, the trial was a circus. The whole country tuned in. People were so hyped to see this monster go down that you'd think they were giving away free Gaga concert tickets outside the courthouse. And the media was having a field day, Black Panther caged in mile-high writing like this was King Kong being shackled on Broadway. Neilson, of course, tried to lawyer his way out of the gallows with this sympathy card. "I didn't mean for her to die," he claimed about Leslie. Like, buddy, you strung a steel cable around a teenage girl's neck in a 50-foot sewer shaft. What the fuck did you think might happen? His defense was a tragic clown act. He insisted that he was just after the ransom and all those murders he'd committed, those were just unfortunate accidents. Sure, Donnie, and I ate that entire cheesecake last night by accident. His own confession showed exactly how much planning had gone into Leslie's abduction, from the wire noose to the 2-star amenities he'd included to the elastoplast around the wire. Like, for fuck's sake, he might as well have painted "I'm a murderer" across his chest like a sports fan's team's colors at a football game. In July of 1976, after weeks of testimony, mountains of evidence, and the entire country screaming for justice, Neilson was finally convicted. Surprise, surprise, the final verdict? Murder, kidnapping, blackmail, robbery, firearms offenses. It was like he went down the entire British crime checklist and ticked every box. He got life, and the judge basically told him he'd die behind bars, and good riddance. No one was gonna miss this dude's potato salad at the family picnic. And as it turns out, this guy really was no Hannibal Lecter. He was a sloppy, mean, deeply insecure bully who liked to terrify people. His entire criminal career was just one big-ass temper tantrum because the world didn't give him the respect he craved. Neilson, though, of course, kept trying to play victim. Prison guards reported that he ranted endlessly about how no one understood him and that he was only forced into crime by a cruel world. Bruh, you planned a whole sewer dungeon. Miss us with your tiny violin, bitch. His own family, heartbreakingly, was left shattered too. Irene, his wife, was just blindsided. She had no clue she'd married Britain's most feared serial killer. Their daughter grew up with a horror of being connected to the Black Panther and had to live with that stigma forever. Just another set of innocent victims to Neilson's bullshit. So, what happened to Donald Neilson after the cameras left? He rotted in prison. Over the decades, he kept up the same bullshit nonsense. Appeals, complaints, demanding special treatment. At one point, he tried to argue that he should be let out on compassionate grounds because he was sick. I'm sick. You left a teenage girl in a concrete hellhole with a wire noose? Nobody's bringing you tea, scones, and sympathy, my dude. So, he stayed locked up and the world moved on. But not the Whittle family. Leslie's mother, of course, never fully recovered. Her brother Ronald, who had tried desperately to get the ransom to save her, blamed himself for the rest of his life. Neilson left behind a scorched earth trail of grief that took generations to heal. Neilson's end finally came in 2011 after decades of prison time. He was 75, old, sick, and looking like a melted Halloween mask. I guess the skincare options in prison aren't the best. I would never survive. They did end up having to move him to a hospital because he was having breathing issues, and he died there alone after being in a wheelchair needing 24-hour care. No one mourned him, no candlelight vigils, no sob stories. Just a cold note in the newspapers that said, Black Panther dead. The world exhaled, turned the page to the crossword puzzle, and moved on. And honestly, that was the best ending possible for a guy who took so much, just quiet, anonymous, and forgotten. What a sad ending. I could not imagine being Leslie. Oh, or even having a family member or somebody that I loved having to go through that. Shit pate on a cracker, that makes me sad. Well, my loves, there you go. Thank you so much for being here. I love having ya. Don't forget to grab your litter box and maybe empty it. Nobody needs that shit in their life, you know? And please don't forget to follow me on social media. It makes my cat tail go stiff. And don't forget, if you see somebody who needs a hug, for fuck's sake, give them one.